Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to a special Saturday Watchman Newscast live stream. Had to come to you here on the weekend, folks, because we have very important breaking news. The Israel Defense Forces today, July 13th, earlier today, may very well have eliminated one of the world's most wanted terrorists, certainly one of the most wanted terrorists in Gaza, second behind only Yahya Sinwar, but certainly in the world. His name is Mohammed Deif, D-E-I-F, and basically the second most wanted in Gaza behind the leader overall of Hamas in Gaza, Yahya Sinwar, who's still on the run. But Mohammed Deif, who was the lead, perhaps is still, it looks very likely that he's been killed. More on that in a minute. And Prime Minister Netanyahu just held a press conference a short while ago talking about it. But Deif was the leader of Hamas's military wing in Gaza. Folks, to give you an idea of what a big fish he was involved in many over the years terror attacks against Israel, and he was the mastermind of October 7th. Mohammed Deif engineered, plotted, planned, directed the worst massacre of the Jewish people since the Holocaust. Over 1,200 people killed on October 7th. You know the story by now, folks. Over 9 months ago, hard to believe that much time has passed. Men, women, children, the elderly Holocaust survivors slaughtered, butchered, cut to pieces, burned to the ground, their homes. Elderly babies dragged back into the bowels of Gaza as captives. Yeah, Mohammed Deif was behind all of that. He was the mastermind. And for every large Hamas offensive against Israel over the years, and we're talking many, right? Going back to 2008, 2012, the list goes on, 2014, 2021, all of these wars that Israel has fought against Hamas, which have been limited in scope for the most part until the current war. Mohammed Deif was the point man in all of that. So to say he was a big fish is understating just how significant this is. And again, as I mentioned at the beginning, look, Israel had been on his trail for years, and some had called him the man with 9 lives. He had survived multiple assassination attempts. And in one, I believe it was around 2011, his wife and child were killed, but he escaped unscathed. And he went on, obviously, to direct more lethal terror, including, again, October 7th against Israel. So it's interesting because a few days ago, I believe it was late last week here in the live stream, I posed a question to all of you. I said, folks, what do you think? If Israel agrees to a ceasefire, agrees to end hostilities, pulls forces out of Gaza, and Yahya Sinwar and Mohammed Deif are still breathing, they're still alive, does that mean Israel's Gaza offensive over the past 9 months overall is incomplete, that it's not a full success? If the top 2 Hamas leaders, the main masterminds behind October 7th, and by the way, number 3 is Mohammed Deif's brother, the third most wanted, bounties on their head, there had been. If they are still alive when Israel pulls out of Gaza, is that only a partial success? And we had varying opinions on that. But now we may not have to take that poll once again, because it's very likely that he is dead and gone. I want to get into all the details of this strike by Israel this morning. Again, Mohammed Deif, if you're just joining us, the number 2 man in Hamas in Gaza, but the number 1 man in terms of their military wing. It looks like he's dead and gone, thanks to an Israeli strike earlier today. But Prime Minister Netanyahu is saying we're not quite sure yet, but every report I'm reading, folks, out of the region is that we likely got him. The intel was pinpoint. It was accurate. He's likely gone. But Israel's smart. Look, they're not going to rush to judgment here and release something, and then this guy rears his head once again and he's alive, and Israel has egg on its face. So very smart of Israel to be cautious here in confirmation. Here's what the Prime Minister said, folks, just a short while ago. Again, Saturday, July 13th. I'm coming to you around 2:10 p.m. Central Time here in the United States, 3 o'clock on the East Coast. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, I'm just reading this straight off my phone, quoting him directly, at his press conference today says Hamas's Mohammed Deif was an arch murderer. The Hamas chief of staff and the architect of the October 7th slaughter and deaths of many Israelis. Netanyahu praised the intelligence that enabled today's strike, and he said the strike was only possible because, key point here, folks, because we rebuffed the many pressures at home and abroad to end this war before its aims are achieved. Basically, he's saying, yeah, we didn't do what the left in Israel was telling us to do. We didn't do what Joe Biden and Europe have been telling us to do, and that is to agree to a ceasefire before the job was done, to enable Hamas to live to fight another day. Good for him. And he said, look, if we had caved to internal and international pressure, Mohammed Deif, a butcher of monumental proportions, one of the world's most wanted terrorists, would still be alive. And by the way, those hostages that were rescued a few weeks ago in a daring operation, they'd still be hostages, most likely. So good for Bibi for staying the course here. And perhaps Yahya Sinwar is next, who knows? But he went on to say that, and by the way, Joe Biden just Thursday at his press conference, his big boy press conference, as they're calling it, he got up, he answered questions. At his press conference, he said the Gaza war needs to end now. Well, folks, let me tell you, I followed Joe Biden's career for many years before he was vice president, before he was president. After all, he's been in D.C., in the swamp, for over 50 years. I can tell you, as someone who follows, obviously, foreign policy, the Middle East, very, very closely, he has been wrong on literally every major foreign policy issue for the past 50 years, stretching from the Cold War to today. This was a man who was the lone voice in the room who did not want to take out Osama bin Laden in 2011. That gives you an idea. So when he's telling you that Israel needs to end the war now, you should probably do the opposite. And thankfully, that's what Israel's doing. And Mohammed Deif, again, Netanyahu said, we're not sure yet. It looks good. We're not sure yet. But he said, look, Israel's facing, and this is what we've been saying here in the newscast, right? An existential threat. Iran's effort, he said, to build a stranglehold surrounding Israel. And he said, victory against Hamas, victory, not something halfway, not a premature ceasefire that leaves Hamas alive to regroup, reconstitute itself and fight another day, carry out more October 7th. Not that, but a complete victory against Hamas, Bibi said, is, quote, a first and crucial condition for victory over the entire Iranian axis, the entire axis of evil. Remember, Iran has surrounded Israel with a ring of fire on all sides. Gaza was a crucial ring in that ring of fire. It includes, you know, the drum roll, please, right? You know the roll call. Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza to the south, the Houthis in Yemen further to the south. Of course, the crown jewel of the Iranian proxies, Hezbollah to the north in Lebanon. Then those various Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, also to the north and to the east, and also to the east, Judea and Samaria, the biblical heartland. The world calls it the West Bank. Here on the Watchman, we call it Judea and Samaria because that's what the Bible calls it. So we'll stick to that. But Iran trying to establish a foothold there as well. But Gaza is fading away for Iran now. They're losing a crucial ring in that ring of fire. And Netanyahu is absolutely right. And I think Israel will methodically take apart each ring as needed. And Hezbollah, we've said it's not if, but when that clash comes. But in the meantime, Mohammed Deif, folks, here's how it went down. That's Bibi's comments. Here's how it went down. Mohammed Deif, I'm quoting here from the Times of Israel, which has been on top of this from the beginning when it broke this morning. Mohammed Deif, the elusive indeed over the years, as I said, many attempts, and he always squirmed out somehow. The elusive commander of Hamas's military wing and another top commander in Hamas were targeted in an airstrike in the southern Gaza Strip on Saturday morning. the Israeli military said. Now, this went down in Khan Yunis, around Khan Yunis, the second largest city in Gaza, not Rafah. So that's a lot of people have been saying over the months, and it's good. Israel is finishing the job in Rafah, again, over the howls and the gnashing of teeth of the world. But there was the assumption that many, maybe Sinwar, maybe Deif, were in Rafah. But it seems that in advance of Rafah, perhaps they moved on to Khan Yunis. But nonetheless, Mohammed Deif and Rafah Salema, the other top commander, were struck with large munitions above ground while in a low building between the Al-Mawasi area and Khan Yunis in southern Gaza, and not in a tunnel. Very interesting, because the assumption is, not the assumption, the truth is that Hamas leaders, and we had that photo of Yahya Sinwar's big ears navigating him through a tunnel right after October 7th. You may have seen that. We showed that in the Watchman previously. So we know they've been in tunnels. But Mohammed Deif, maybe he figured, well, Israel's moved through Khan Yunis already. They're in Rafah right now, and they're carrying out operations once again in Gaza City to the north. Maybe Khan Yunis, he felt, was a safe place, or maybe not, as we saw. According to the IDF, no hostages, no Israeli hostages or American hostages. Reminder, 5 U.S. citizens in Hamas's clutches right now as well. None of them were held at the site where Deif was when the strike was carried out. His fate is still unknown, though defense sources in Israel, again, said there is a growing likelihood that he has been killed in the strike. A senior Hamas official, surprise, surprise, denied that Deif was targeted in the strike. Hamas is claiming Israel killed dozens of civilians in the strike. That's Hamas's MO. Of course they're going to do that. They're going to try and twist the narrative and turn the attention, just as they did last month with that daring hostage rescue in Rafah. They said, well, civilians were killed, overlooking or not even mentioning the fact that 4 hostages were freed from demonic, brutal captivity that were intentionally placed, by the way, in a civilian area. That's what Hamas does. They use civilians as human shields. It's the height of cowardice and pure demonic evil, impure, I should say, demonic evil. But watch the narrative, folks, just a heads up over the next few days. Watch how the narrative shifts, or Hamas attempts to shift, and the mainstream media attempts to shift to not that one of the world's most wanted terrorists was killed, a man with Israeli, American, and many other bloods on his hand from people who live throughout the region, a butcher of epic proportions. Not that he was finally taken out and that his takeout may mean the war is going to end sooner. No. You'll hear how the IDF was careless and civilians were killed in the process. When Mohammed Deif intentionally, of course, surrounds himself with civilians, you know the drill. We've talked about this many times. Hey, if you like what you're hearing, like may be a strong word. We're talking about war, but if you appreciate what you're hearing and you want the real story for such a time as this, unfiltered news, current events from a biblical perspective, unapologetically, then be sure to subscribe to the Watchman News channel right here on YouTube and click the notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted. We've got nearly, hard to believe, folks, nearly 1 million subscribers now. By the grace of God, and thanks to all of you for being with us, loyal viewers. We truly, truly appreciate it. It's not for our glory, it's for God's glory, and to get the message out in times of, it seems sometimes, universal deceit, right? And where good is called evil and evil is called good. We're trying to break through the clutter with a message of truth and biblical truth, again, for such a time as this. So we'd love if you could subscribe. The more people that tune in, the more YouTube will recommend it, so more people around the world can get this message when it's sorely, sorely needed. And again, cut through the falsehoods that Israel is facing and that the body of Christ is facing as well. As we have this, and we saw the result in Europe last week, in France and Britain, the hard left ascending. We have this unholy alliance of radical Islamists and the radical left, and we saw that on full display on our college campuses here in the United States over the past few months in the streets of our cities. So that's something that is growing. It's really an evil force that's growing. So we want to stand on the other side of that with a message of biblical truth and shine light in the darkness. And that's why we do what we do here in the channel. But more details. Hamas says that it's nonsense. It didn't happen. But it's interesting. Al-Mawasi, the area where Mohammed Deif was taken out, is designated by Israel as a humanitarian zone. So again, he intentionally went to a humanitarian zone and surrounded himself with civilians and used them as human shields. This is who they are, folks. The IDF said the building struck was not in a tent camp for displaced Palestinians, but in a fenced-off Hamas compound within a civilian environment. So what Hamas did is, look, Israel sets up the humanitarian zone, it's civilians. Hamas burrows in there and sets up their own little headquarters within the civilian area, menacing, as they always do, the Gaza civilians, I'm sure. And this is like, they're gangsters. It's a demonic death cult, but at the end of the day, they're gangsters. And they're menacing, intimidating people, taking food from them, everything else. So they set up shop inside this humanitarian zone. And the thinking there was, well, they won't hit us here. It's a humanitarian zone. Just like the thinking of Hamas when they put rocket launchers, when they place all sorts of military assets inside of hospitals, inside of schools, in playgrounds, etc. They're thinking, well, no one's going to hit us here. And you know what? The IDF doesn't, for the most part, before October 7th at least, because the IDF has the strictest rules of engagement in the world. And I'll say this without hesitation. The Israeli military, along with the U.S. military, these are the most humane fighting forces possibly in world history. I say that without hesitation. We could go on, and we have on previous live streams, about the incredible precaution Israel takes, Israel's military. They call off airstrikes, it seems, more than they carry them out because civilians are in harm's way, and Israel goes to extraordinary lengths to avoid civilian casualties. But sometimes when you have a Mohammed Deif, you've got to pull the trigger. And you're not going to have a perfect climate ever where Mohammed Deif is just walking down the street alone. Highly unlikely. He's surrounded by a phalanx of bodyguards, and he intentionally weaves and moves through civilian areas. And it's interesting. All the anti-Israel haters, they howl and they gnash their teeth. But why is Hamas putting all of these important assets in civilian areas? Because they know Israel won't strike civilian areas unless it absolutely positively has no other choice. That proves my point right there. Okay. Several dozen more Hamas operatives were killed in this strike today, including, I told you, surrounded by a lot of people, including Deif's guards and Salame's guards. Deif, 58 years old, a lifetime of terror. He commanded the Izz al-Din al-Qassam brigades. That's Hamas's military wing for over 2 decades. He's long been one of the most wanted terror figures by Israel, architect of October 7th. And Salame, the commander of Hamas's Khan Yunis brigade, another big fish, he was definitely killed, Israel says. And if he's alongside Mohammed Deif, you assume that Deif is as well. We'll wait for final confirmation on that. Salame was very likely killed close to Deif, acts as his deputy. So these are 2 very big fish. And the targeted site was about 500 meters away from the furthest point the IDF advanced in Khan Yunis earlier this year. Remember, the IDF conquered Gaza City and Khan Yunis months ago. They had that long stalemate and holdup before finally going into Rafah. And the holdup was because the world was howling and demanding an immediate ceasefire, including the United States. Israel, thankfully, did not listen. Mohammed Deif reached this compound only recently, and the IDF got the news last night. And today, around 11 a.m. Israel time, they made their move and carried out this airstrike. So we shall see, folks. I mean, this guy, again, an arch terrorist, notorious. It looks very likely that he's gone. That's why we have a question mark in the title here in the thumbnail in this post. Netanyahu gave the press conference a short while ago and said, look, we very likely believe he's gone. But as a credit to Israel, they're not wildly running out there and saying, we got him. They're dotting their I's and crossing their T's and doing their due diligence. That's a credit to Israel. That's called professionalism. And we expect confirmation, hopefully in the next 24 hours. We shall see. But okay, a big fish killed. This was the kind of news I think Israelis were waiting for, and frankly, perhaps much of the world, in that they're thinking, and they want ceasefire now. That's their view on it. And we heard that from Joe Biden the other night. But their view on it is perhaps the sooner Israel cuts off the head of the snake of Hamas, Sinwar, Mohammed Deif, the sooner this thing can end. And we may be about to find out. Perhaps there is certainly something to that. So Mohammed Deif has killed the number 2 man for Hamas in Gaza, arch terrorist. Yahya Sinwar, the top man, still alive and breathing, apparently. Eventually, I think Sinwar's fate will be he's either killed or he agrees to be exiled as part of a ceasefire deal. But certainly, you have to think, folks, that this hurts morale for Hamas, which already was obviously rock bottom, considering that Israel, according to Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, just the other day, has eliminated some 60% of all Hamas fighters in Gaza. 60% eliminated, according to Yoav Gallant. Now, they probably still have 10 to 20,000 more, probably more like 20,000 more. But those 20,000 are on the run. They're in tunnels. They're hiding in compounds like we saw Mohammed Deif. They're moving around. They're living, constantly looking over their shoulders and looking in the skies for Israeli fighter jets and drones. So Hamas has been crippled. And Palestinian Islamic Jihad as well, the other main force. Iranian-backed, both of them, in Gaza. And it's interesting to me, folks, that the rocket barrages that have come out of Gaza for the better part of 20 years have slowed to a trickle. You'll see some sporadic rocket fire. We saw some last weekend out of Rafah, the place where no one wanted Israel to go into. Well, it's sporadic now, and that rocket arsenal has been smashed as well. Many of the tunnels uncovered, much more. Look, that tunnel network stretches 300 miles underneath Gaza. According to some reports, it's larger than the Paris Metro, the London Underground. It's insane and evil. That word can never be overused when it comes to Hamas. But what they built in Gaza, think about this, folks. And Mohammed Deif was the point man, the guy we're talking about today, who's most likely dead and gone. He was the point man in all of this, taking billions of dollars in international aid that the West in particular, and the United States, naively poured into Gaza. And what did Hamas, which was the governing force in Gaza since 2007, elected in 2006, elected, key point, by the people of Gaza, the same people of Gaza, those Gaza civilians who followed Hamas into southern Israel on October 7th, thousands of Gazan civilians, and raped and pillaged, and then helped drag hostages back into Gaza. And when they were in Gaza, taunted them, mocked them, slapped them. The videos everywhere. Those are the innocent, quote unquote, Gaza civilians. But I digress. October 6th, 2006, they vote for Hamas. Poll after poll shows that the majority of Gazans still supports Hamas and is happy about October 7th. In 2007, Hamas violently expels Fatah from Gaza, and since 2007, Hamas has had sole control of the Strip. And what you need there now, and I know a lot of the back and forth has been, okay, post-Hamas, now what? And we've got people, Sweden, I see here. Hello. We've got people, I'm just looking at our very active chat here from around the world joining us. Welcome, everyone, from around the world on this Saturday afternoon. If you're just joining us, Mohammed Deif, the leader of Hamas's military wing, likely dead as a result of an Israeli airstrike this morning, the second most powerful Hamas leader in Gaza, one of the world's most wanted terrorists, may very well be dead and gone. And I was saying a minute ago, what happens in Gaza after the war, Well, you're going to need a systematic de-radicalization program, similar to what happened in post-war Germany and post-war Japan. And it's going to take a while. And it's different because in Gaza, you're dealing with a religion. You could say Nazism was a religion of sorts for the Nazis and emperor worship in Japan, okay. But Islam's been around for well over 1,000 years, some 1,600 years. And strike that, 1,400 years. And it's deeply entrenched, obviously, in the region, in Gaza. So there's going to have to be a massive de-radicalization program in Gaza. It's going to take a while. That Hamas has so brainwashed and poisoned the population there. But this had to be done. October 7th, it should have been done before October 7th, the crushing of Hamas and the de-radicalization in Gaza. Sadly, it took October 7th for Israel to finally move decisively. But here we are. And does this, folks, make a ceasefire now more likely? Hamas's morale, as I said a minute ago, they've been smashed across all levels. Top commanders killed, Sinwar's alive, but most of the top commanders killed. Rocket arsenal completely just deplenished. Many Hamas terrorists, some 60% killed. So Hamas's morale, they're seeing Israeli troops in their nightmares when they lay their head down on the pillow, if they lay their head down on a pillow at night. And now Mohammed Deif, who was a legend for all the wrong reasons in Gaza over the past few decades, he's gone. Israel has shown they can reach Hamas anywhere. Hostages have been rescued in daring rescues over the past several weeks. Does Hamas now limp to the finish line and say, okay, ceasefire, please? There's a good chance. And Netanyahu has been correct on this. The more pressure we put on Hamas, the more likely it is they agree to a ceasefire. Now, if we pull out prematurely and agree to a ceasefire now, he was saying this months ago, then it's going to leave Hamas in prime position. They're going to bide their time and they'll build up and they'll carry out more attacks in the future. They'll reconstitute. And we've seen that in Gaza City. Shifa Hospital. The IDF carried an operation out there November, December. They had to go back in just a few months ago because after the IDF left, Hamas went back in. It's a game of whack-a-mole in a sense. And Bibi said, look, we pull out now, they're going to reconstitute. But now Hamas is so weakened and so defanged that they may start begging for a ceasefire. And if Yahya Sinwar is eventually killed, the whole house of cards collapses, you would think. And it's completely scattershot. And it's unclear how much communication Sinwar has with, say, a Mohammed Deif and the foot soldiers on the ground anyway on a daily basis. He apparently has some sort of channel to the Hamas leaders in Qatar, like Ismail Haniyeh. But this thing is collapsing for Hamas. So they may agree to a ceasefire that is very favorable to Israel. We shall see. But folks, this was a major, major event today, and that's why we came to you. We'll be back with you on Monday, perhaps tomorrow. Hey, that's why we want you to subscribe and click the notification bell, because you'll get a heads up if I'm coming to you live tomorrow, perhaps. We may have new developments in this story. And before, if it's Hezbollah, top Hezbollah commander being taken out, you would say, wow, Hezbollah is going to respond. Hamas just doesn't have the capability to respond in any kind of major way anymore. They may fire some rockets, don't get me wrong, but not like it was, where you'd have volleys of 500 rockets in one day. That's done. So we're keeping a very close eye on this. Hey, if you love this channel, we have a second YouTube channel. I know you might say, Stakelbeck, you're crazy. I've got this channel. We've got the podcast called the Stackscast and our nightly show on TBN every weeknight, Monday through Friday. It's called Stakelbeck Tonight. Number one, we encourage you to check the show out on TBN, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, every weeknight, with a re-air at 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time. But because we've got the new show, we just launched it in March, we've got the Stakelbeck Tonight YouTube channel as well. You've got the main channel here, nearly 1 million subscribers. We've also got at Stakelbeck Tonight. Folks, it's at Stakelbeck Tonight. Give us a subscribe over there as well. A lot of the kind of content you know and love from this channel, but broader there. We're hitting, of course, Middle East, prophecy, biblical archaeology, all that good stuff. But also, we've got people like Kevin Sorbo, who was just on the show, President Trump, who I just interviewed last month. So some very relevant content that's not always Middle East prophetic related, but which is very important. And I think you'll like it. And I think you'll appreciate it. So it's at Stakelbeck tonight. Check that out as well. Until next time, thanks so much for joining us here on this Saturday. God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an upload, and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. And don't forget to share your thoughts, insights, and comments below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you back here tomorrow.